The room was quiet, too quiet for a royal chamber. The council stood tall around a small platform, their faces cold and eyes full of judgment. On the platform sat a tiny alien girl, her skin soft purple, her silver hair falling over one eye. She was Princess Lixie, the only daughter of the royal house of Tyrell, but no one bowed to her today. Instead, they whispered things like shameful and broken under their breath. Her left leg was twisted since birth, making her walk with a limp. Her right eye had never opened, and her voice came out soft and slow. She was not what they wanted in a future queen. She was not strong, not tall, not powerful. She was a disappointment to her kind, and today they made it official. "Princess Lixie," said the High Elder, his voice sharp like ice. "You have been examined and judged. You are not fit to lead the Tyrell. You bring shame to our name and weakness to our bloodline." She looked up, her one eye shining with silent pain, but she said nothing. She had heard these words many times in the shadows, but never in front of the stars. A servant walked forward holding a small object, a crown, her crown. It was cracked down the middle, not by accident but on purpose. They had split it to show the world what they thought of her. "You are no longer royalty," the High Elder said. "You will be exiled to space, far from this world. Your pod will be supplied with food and air, but no return route." Lixie's lips moved, but the words were barely a whisper. "Why was I born like this?" No one answered. No one even looked her in the eye. They turned away as if she was already gone. Guards took her arms gently, not with kindness, but duty. They led her down the hall, her steps slow, her limp louder than their boots. She passed portraits of strong rulers, warriors with golden armor, queens with wings of light, and then she passed an empty fight. Rame, meant for her, now never to be filled. The pod waited at the edge of the skydock, cold and small. Inside, it looked like a metal coffin with blinking lights. They placed her in, closed the hatch, and left without goodbye. The engines roared, and then silence. Princess Lixie was alone, floating in the stars. She sat in the corner of the pod, her knees close to her chest. She stared at her hands, wondering if they had ever held real worth. She pressed a small button on the console, and a voice filled the pod. It was a human voice, reading a poem in a language she barely knew, but something about the voice made her heart pause. It was warm, not cold like the council's. It was soft, not sharp like the elders. It said words like hope, light, and even broken stars shine. She played the message again and again and again. For the first time in her life, someone's voice made her feel seen. She didn't know the human's name or where he was, but she whispered to herself, "I will find the voice." And in the endless dark of space, a tiny spark lit up inside her chest. It wasn't a crown, but it was something more. It was the start of a new story, and she wasn't done yet. The stars outside the pod didn't blink. They just sat there, silent and far. Lixie watched them through the small round window, her breath fogging the glass. She had no home now, no name, no crown, but she still had the voice. It played again as she pressed the same button. The human's voice echoed softly inside the pod. "This poem is for no one in particular," the voice said, "but if you're listening, you matter." She closed her eyes, letting the words fall over her like a warm blanket. Her chest tightened, not with pain, but something else, something she didn't have a word for yet. The voice wasn't perfect. It had cracks and laughter and breath between the lines. But to Lixie, it was more perfect than any voice she had heard on her homeworld. Those voices always judged her, measured her, discarded her. This one accepted her, even though it didn't know her. Days passed, maybe weeks. Time moved slowly in the dark, and her pod drifted endlessly. The food pills tasted like dust, and the recycled air grew stale. Still, she kept playing the voice. It became her sun, her moon, her reason to stay awake. Then one day, while rewiring a broken panel, Lixie noticed something. The voice wasn't just a recording. There was a faint signal, still active, still broadcasting. Her fingers trembled as she traced it, a weak radio stream bouncing through space, hidden behind the noise. I found you, she whispered, eyes wide. It was coming from a distant system, one marked as primitive by the old star maps. Earth. A human world, full of green places, warm waters, and old skies. Her people avoided it, called it backward and simple, but Lixie didn't care. It was the home of the voice. She typed slowly, rerouting power to the thrusters. Her pod shook as the engines responded. It wasn't much, but she had just enough fuel to shift direction, just enough to chase that voice. She smiled for the foe. Her time in cycles. Her hands ached and her legs cramped. Her twisted foot throbbed with every small movement, but she didn't stop. She taped wires together, rewrote guidance paths, and whispered softly as she worked. Wait for me, she said to the stars. I'm coming. Along the way, she listened more closely to the man's voice. Sometimes he told stories, sometimes he just spoke to the silence. He talked about how hard it was to live alone, how sometimes he wished someone would answer. Lixie placed a hand over her chest, right above her heart. You're not alone anymore, she whispered. As the pod moved closer to Earth, systems began to flicker. The lights dimmed, food ran low, the engine coughed with every push. Her strength faded, and sleep pulled at her like gravity. Still, she stayed awake, watching the voice's signal grow stronger. It felt like a heartbeat guiding her home. Then the stars changed. The dark space gave way to a yellow sun, blue oceans, and a small green world. Her pod rattled, alarms rang, warning her of entry too fast, but she didn't panic. She just whispered, I made it. As the pod blazed through Earth's sky like a falling star, she held tight to the one thing that mattered, the voice, the words that saved her when no one else would, and she smiled as the pod began to fall. The sky above the small Earth village was quiet. Only birds flew over the wide green fields and dirt roads. A few farmers worked the land, wiping sweat from their foreheads. Then a streak of fire tore across the sky like a burning arrow. It roared louder than thunder, and the ground shook for a moment. Elias looked up from his field, shovel in hand. The fireball was coming fast, heading toward the forest near the edge of the village. He dropped his shovel and ran without a word. Others stayed back, scared it was a bomb or something worse, but Elias ran straight into the smoke. When he reached the crash site, he saw a small pod buried halfway in the mud. Steam hissed from the sides and the door was cracked open. He stepped closer, coughing from the smoke, and then he saw her, a tiny figure inside, curled up like a frightened animal. She had purple skin and silver hair, her body shaking. One leg was bent at a strange angle, and her arms were covered in cuts. She looked up at him with one wide, scared eye. She didn't speak, just stared like she expected to be hurt. Elias didn't move too fast. He knelt down beside the pod and spoke softly. It's okay, he said. I'm not going to hurt you. The alien girl blinked, confused by his gentle tone. She didn't understand his words, but his voice sounded familiar. He reached out slowly and offered his hand. After a long pause, she placed her tiny hand in his. He felt how cold she was. Without thinking, he wrapped her in his old work coat. You're freezing, he whispered. Let's get you out of here. He lifted her gently, surprised at how light she was. Her head rested against his chest, and her breathing was shallow. Elias carried her through the woods, ignoring the branches scratching his arms. She didn't fight him, didn't speak, just held on tightly. She had no strength left to question his kindness. When they reached his small house, he pushed the door open with his shoulder. The place was simple, just one floor, wooden walls, and a fireplace. He laid her on the couch, then ran for warm blankets and water. The alien girl watched him with tired eyes. She had landed on a world she didn't know, in front of a man she had never met, but something about him made her feel safe. Elias sat beside her and offered a spoon of warm soup. She sniffed it, then took a slow sip. Her eyes widened at the taste. Real food, not the cold pills from the pod. She ate slowly, her hands still shaking. When she was done, Elias smiled. You've been through a lot, haven't you? He said. She didn't answer, but a single tear rolled down her cheek. Elias wiped it away gently. You're not alone anymore, he whispered. Even though she didn't know the words, she understood the feeling. Then something strange happened. He picked up a small book and began to read out loud. It was the same voice, the same poem, the same message she had followed through space. Her eyes widened in shock. She opened her mouth and tried to speak, but only a soft sound came out. Elias paused, looking at her curiously. She pointed to his chest, then to the radio on the shelf. "You heard me before, didn't you?" he guessed. She nodded, and for the first time she smiled. The morning light slipped through the wooden shutters. Warm rays touched the little alien girl sleeping on the couch. Her silver hair glowed softly, and her body, once shaking, was still. Elias sat nearby in a chair, holding a cup of tea, watching her breathe. He didn't know her name or where she came from, but he knew one thing. She needed peace, and he could give that. When she opened her eyes, she flinched for a second. Then she remembered where she was. No sharp voices, no cold metal, no pain, just the smell of fresh bread, and a man smiling gently. "Morning, little one," Elias said softly. She tried to sit up, but her weak leg made her wince. He rushed to help, placing a pillow behind her back. Then he handed her a piece of warm bread with honey. She bit into it slowly, her eyes wide at the taste. No one on her homeworld had ever given her food with kindness. Food had been duty, not comfort, but this felt like a gift. She looked at Elias, confused by his care. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracked and unsure. Elias didn't understand her alien language, but he understood her eyes. He picked up a children's book and showed her the pictures: animals, trees, planets, smiles. She reached out and touched the drawings, amazed. Then he opened the book and began to read. His voice was the same one she had followed through space. The poems, the stories, the warmth, it all came from him. She leaned in closer, listening with all her heart. It didn't matter that she couldn't understand every word. The feeling was enough. When he finished reading, she tapped her chest, then pointed at him, then at the small radio. "Voice," she whispered. "You." He smiled in surprise, then nodded. "You heard me up there, didn't you?" he asked. She nodded slowly, one tear falling down her cheek. He walked to the corner of the room and returned with paper and a pencil. He drew a simple figure of her falling from the sky, then drew his house and her beside it. She giggled softly, her finger tracing the lines. For the first time in her life, someone was talking to her, not about her. Day after day, she rested in his home. He gave her books, blankets, bread, and time. He never rushed her, never forced her to speak. Sometimes they sat in silence, reading or drawing. Other times he told her about Earth, its trees, animals, and sky. She listened with wonder, soaking up every word. He even made her a small cane carved from wood, so she could move around without falling. Her limp was still there, but now she didn't hide it, because Elias never looked at her with pity, only with kindness. One evening she took the pencil and drew something herself. It was a small crown cracked in the middle. Then she drew a hand, his hand, holding it together. She gave him the paper, her eye full of hope. He stared at it for a long time, then said softly, "You're not broken, you're just different." Rain tapped softly on the windows as the wind howled outside. The little wooden house was warm inside, filled with firelight and quiet. Lixie sat curled under a soft blanket on Elias's couch. She watched the flames dance in the fireplace, and beside her, Elias read aloud from another old book. It had been several days since her crash landing. Her body was healing slowly, but her heart was healing faster. She felt safe here, not like a prisoner, not like a mistake. Elias didn't stare at her limp or her small form. He only spoke with warmth, offered bread, and made her laugh. But that night, Lixie couldn't sleep. Something inside her was heavy. She looked at Elias, who was dozing in the nearby chair, and she whispered the words out loud, not knowing if he'd understand. "I was supposed to be a queen," she said, her voice low. "They threw me away." Elias opened one eye, then sat up slowly. He didn't say anything at first, just listened. Lixie pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I was born, not perfect," she continued. "My leg was twisted, my eye would not open. They said I was weak, cursed, unfit to rule." She looked down at her hands, her voice shaking. "My own family broke my crown and sent me into space. No goodbye, no tears, just exile." Elias leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He didn't interrupt, didn't pity her, he just let her speak. "I thought I would die in that pod," she whispered. "But then I heard your voice, reading poems to no one. You saved me without knowing it. Her eye met his, filled with emotion she didn't have words for. Why would someone like you care about someone like me? Elias breathed in slowly, thinking. Then he smiled gently. I've lived alone a long time, he said. I talk to the stars because no one else listens. But someone did, he added, nodding at her. You did. Lixie blinked, tears gathering again. He reached over and placed a hand on hers. You're not weak, Lixie, he said softly. You survived space, pain, and betrayal. You came all the way here following nothing but a voice. That's not weakness, he added. That's strength. They sat together in silence for a while. The rain outside grew louder, but inside it was calm. Lixie leaned against his arm, letting the warmth comfort her. It wasn't like the cold halls of her palace. It wasn't like the sharp voices of her people. This was different. This was real. But outside, in the dark village beyond the trees, something was stirring. A shadow watched the house from the bushes. A local man, older, gruff, with a rifle slung over his shoulder. He had seen the fireball fall, and later heard rumors of Elias taking in a stranger who looked wrong, who wasn't human. Fear lived deep in his heart, and fear made him cruel. He whispered to himself, can't trust things from the sky, can't let them change our ways. And then he faded into the woods, his footsteps lost in the wind. Back in the house, Lixie had finally fallen asleep. Her head rested against Elias's arm. He pulled the blanket up to her shoulders and whispered, You're safe here. But he didn't know that danger had already found them. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The air smelled like wet soil and fresh leaves. Lixie sat outside on the porch wrapped in her blanket. She watched birds hop across the fence and butterflies float through the tall grass. It was peaceful, almost like a dream. She had never known a world this gentle. Elias was fixing the old garden fence. He waved at her and smiled, and she waved back. Her cane rested beside her, carved by his hands. Though her legs still hurt, she no longer felt ashamed. He had never once called her broken. To him, she was simply Lixie. Later that afternoon, Elias took her into the field. He pointed out each crop with pride. Corn, squash, and beans. Lixie listened, her eye wide with wonder. She touched the soft leaves and asked their names in her soft voice. Elias repeated each one slowly until she remembered them. The bond between them grew stronger with every passing hour. But in the shadows of the forest nearby, anger was growing. The man who had watched from the trees had returned. He crouched behind the fence, eyes fixed on the alien girl. She's poison, he muttered. Not natural, not welcome. He held a bottle in one hand and a lighter in the other. Fear had turned into hatred, and hatred needed no reason. That night, as Elias and Lixie shared a quiet meal by the fire, a gust of wind blew through the cracks in the wall. Lixie turned her head suddenly, sniffing the air. Smoke. Elias stood up fast, his eyes narrowing. Then came the sound, crackling fire, and then shouts from the barn. They both rushed outside. Flames danced along the wooden roof of the barn. The animals inside cried out in fear. The fire spread quickly, licking up the walls and beams. No, 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 Elias shouted, grabbing a bucket. But it was too late to stop it. Lixie stared at the fire, frozen. It reminded her of the royal chambers, the judgment, the pain someone had done. This someone wanted her gone again. She backed away, breathing fast, her legs weak. I should leave, she whispered. This is my fault. Elias turned to her, his face lit by orange flames. No, he said firmly. You did nothing wrong. But they'll come again, she said, tears in her eye. They'll hurt you because of me. Elias walked up to her, kneeling down. Let them try, he said, his voice steady. He placed a hand on her shoulder. You're not running again, Lixie. You belong here, and I'm not letting fear take that from you. She stared at him, confused. Why was he standing beside her, even now? She had been thrown away by her own people, but this man, this human, refused to let her go. The barn burned down to ashes before dawn. Villagers came to help put out the rest. Some stared at Lixie with confusion, some with fear, but Elias stood between them and her, never blinking. She's not a monster, he said. She's a guest and under my care. No one dared challenge him that night, but whispers began to spread across the village, and Lixie knew the peace they had built was cracking. Still, in her heart, a new fire was burning, not of fear, but of courage. She would not run again, not this time, not while someone believed in her. The sun rose slowly over the hills. Smoke still drifted from the black remains of the barn. Elias and Lixie stood in silence, watching the empty space where it once stood. It wasn't just wood and tools that had burned. It was their quiet life, their hidden peace. The village was no longer quiet. People whispered behind doors, pointed from windows. Some were curious, others scared. A few believed Elias had lost his mind, but no one dared come close. Not yet. Later that day, a black van rolled into the village. It had no markings, but everyone knew what it meant. Government. Out stepped 3 people in suits. 1 man, 2 women. Their eyes were sharp, their steps stiff. They didn't wave, they didn't smile. They came straight to Elias's home, knocked once, and walked in when the door opened. Lixie sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look afraid, only tired. Elias stood beside her like a wall, protecting, steady, silent. "Mr. Elias Quinn," said the lead agent, "you are harboring an unidentified alien life form." Elias didn't blink. "She has a name," he said. "It's Lixie. She's not a threat." The agents looked at each other. "She crashed in a pod from unknown space," said the woman on the left. "She's royalty," Elias replied, "and her own people threw her away. Now she's finally found someone who sees her as more than her broken leg." Lixie looked up, confused at the words she only partly understood, but she could see Elias's jaw was tight. She reached over and took his hand. He squeezed hers gently. The agents asked more questions. Where she came from, how long she'd been here, did she carry weapons, was she injured, was she dangerous? Elias answered each one with calm and truth. "She's not dangerous," he repeated. "She's just been hurt. By her world, and now by ours." They told him she had to come with them, for study, for safety, for Naciona. El protocol. Elias stood tall, voice steady. "No," he said, "not unless she chooses." Lixie stared at him, surprised. He didn't speak for her, he gave her the power. The lead agent turned to Lixie and said slowly, "You may speak now, if you understand." Lixie stood up with effort, leaning on her cane. Then she pointed to her chest and said one word, "Home." Then pointed to Elias, "Safe." The agent said nothing for a moment. Then one of them took out a small device and recorded her. "She's intelligent, aware, and communicating," she noted. "She has rights under Earth's interstellar contact laws." They left without taking her, but not without warning. "We'll be watching," they said. "Too late," Elias replied. "She's already been watched her whole life." The news spread quickly after that. Photos of Lixie leaked, rumors grew. Some said she was dangerous, others called her a miracle. Supporters began sending letters, drawings, even poems. Others demanded she leave Earth, afraid of what they didn't understand. A week later, Elias received a message from the Earth Council. They wanted to meet her, publicly, to let her speak for herself, to let the world hear her voice. Lixie sat with Elias that night, staring at the stars above. "If I speak, they might still hate me," she said. Elias nodded. "But someone will hear you, and someone will understand." She looked at him and whispered, "Will you come with me?" Elias smiled. "Every step," he said. The Great Hall of the Earth Council was larger than anything Lixie had ever seen. Tall glass walls let in the golden light of Earth's sun. Rows of leaders, scientists, and reporters sat in silence. Cameras hovered in the air, recording every moment. This was not just a meeting, it was history. Lixie stood behind the curtain, heart pounding in her chest. Her hands trembled, her cane felt heavy. She wore a simple dress Elias had given her, soft blue like the sky. She had no crown, no jewels, no title, just her voice, and the human who believed in it. Elias stood beside her, dressed in his best clothes. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and warm. "You don't have to be perfect," he whispered. "Just speak the truth." She nodded, swallowing hard. She had come so far. Now she had to speak for others like her. A soft chime rang through the hall. The speaker announced, We welcome Lixie of the Tyrell system. A few whispers followed, some curious, some doubtful. Lixie stepped forward, slowly but proudly. Her limp was clear, her cane clicking with each step. But her eye was steady. She reached the podium, placed both hands on it. The microphone buzzed softly. For a moment, she just looked at them, all of them. Then she spoke. "I was born wrong," she said slowly, her voice clear but soft. "Not by my heart, not by my spirit, but by the eyes of others. I was told I was too small, too weak, too broken. My crown was taken, my name erased, and I was thrown into space." The room was silent, not a cough, not a whisper, only the sound of her truth. "I thought I was meant to disappear," she said, "but I heard a voice, a human voice, reading poems to the stars. It gave me hope." She looked toward Elias, who stood at the side, tears in his eyes. "I followed that voice," Lixie said, "and found kindness, safety, and love. He didn't ask what I could offer. He didn't fear my leg, my scars, or my silence. He saw me." She paused, letting the words settle like dust in sunlight. "Some of you still see me as a threat," she continued. "Some think I don't belong here. But there are many like me in your world and mine. Pushed aside, hidden, called broken. I speak for them today," she said, her voice stronger now. "They are not useless, not cursed, not wrong. They are stars waiting to shine." She stepped back from the podium, not to applause, not yet, but to silence, a deep, thoughtful silence. Then one person clapped, then another, and then the room filled with the sound of hands meeting hands. News anchors called it the speech that shook stars. People across the world watched her story unfold. Some cried, some cheered, and some, for the first time, understood. Letters poured in, messages from humans with disabilities, children who felt unseen, adults who had given up, all thanking Lixie for saying what they never could. Her message was clear. Kindness is not weakness. Difference is not danger. And every voice, even a quiet one, matters. Back in the village, Elias waited at the house. The radio buzzed to life, and he heard her voice again. This time, it wasn't just for him. It was for the galaxy. And he smiled, knowing she had done what few ever could. She had turned rejection into purpose, and silence into power. The sky above Elias's house was clear. Stars twinkled softly, just like the ones Lixie had floated through weeks ago. She sat outside with Elias, a blanket around her shoulders. The world was quiet, but her mind was loud. The speech had changed everything, but it hadn't ended the story. Every day, more messages came. Letters from humans, aliens, teachers, children, even soldiers. Some wrote in tears, others in hope. "I thought I was the only one," many of them said. Lixie read them all, each one with care. She never imagined her voice would travel farther than her pod. But now, it echoed across planets. Still, she felt something unfinished, something missing. Her past hadn't fully let go. Then, one morning, a ship landed on the edge of the village, sleek, silver, and silent. It didn't belong to Earth. The markings were from Tyrell, her homeworld. Elias stood beside her as the ship opened. Her heart beat fast. 3 figures stepped out, cloaked in robes of black and gold. The one in front removed her hood. It was her aunt, Lady Varel, a council member, the same one who had once voted to exile her. But now her eyes looked tired, not proud. She bowed her head slightly. "Princess Lixie," she said, "we come not to take you, but to ask." Lixie narrowed her eye, confused. Varel continued, "Your speech was broadcast across systems. Even our people heard it. And many wept." "We were wrong," Varel said, her voice shaking. "We saw weakness where there was strength. We saw a limp and missed the courage. We saw a quiet voice and missed the fire behind it. Will you return with us as our princess again?" Lixie looked down at her hands, once trembling, now steady. The child who left her world was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone stronger. She shook her head slowly. "I don't want the throne," she said, "but I'll visit. If you promise to see those like me, not as curses, but as part of the stars." Varel nodded, her eyes moist with regret. "We will," she said. "We must." Then she reached into a pouch and pulled out something small. It was Lixie's broken crown, repaired, whole, shining again. "We fixed it," she whispered. "But you made it valuable again." Lixie held the crown in her hands. She didn't place it on her head. Instead, she set it on the table beside Elias's books. "A crown is just metal," she said. "But words change hearts." The Terrell delegation left quietly. No ceremony, no parade, just a silent promise carried in the wind. Back inside, Lixie and Elias sat near the fire. She held one of the fan letters in her lap, a drawing from a child with a walking stick. She said, "I made her feel like a hero," Lixie said. Elias smiled. "You are one." She looked at the repaired crown one last time, then turned back to the letter. Her voice was no longer soft. It was steady. That night, she wrote her first book, a story about a little girl thrown away, who followed a voice through the stars, not to find a throne, but to find herself, and every page ended with the same message. You are not broken, you are brave. The wind blew gently through the tall grass around Elias's cottage. The sky was blue, the air fresh, and birds sang from the trees. It was quiet, but it was the kind of quiet that felt full, not empty. Inside the small wooden house, Lixie sat by the window, a pen in her hand. A half-filled notebook rested in her lap, its pages filled with words that once lived only in her heart. She looked around the room. There was a new bookshelf now packed with letters, poems, and stories sent from across Earth and even a few distant planets. Her repaired crown still sat in the corner, collecting dust. She hadn't worn it once, and she never would. It wasn't her anymore. What mattered now were the words she shared, not the title she lost. Elias walked in holding 2 cups of tea. He handed one to Lixie and sat beside her. He looked older now, not in years, but in weight lifted from his shoulders. "You've got another radio message," he said, smiling. Lixie tilted her head, curious. He turned the old radio on, the one that once called out to the stars. A young voice came through, nervous but excited. "I hope this reaches you," the boy said. I'm different too. They told me I wasn't strong enough, but then I heard your story. You made me believe I could be more." Lixie closed her eye for a moment, a small smile on her face. That voice could have been her, years ago, floating alone in space. She took the microphone and pressed the record button. "This is Lixie," she said gently. "I hear you. You are already more than enough. Keep going." She ended the recording and handed it to Elias to transmit. He gave her a nod but didn't speak. No words were needed. This was their new life, sending hope across the stars, one voice at a time. Outside, children from the village had started gathering near the edge of the fence. At first, they came out of curiosity. Now they came to hear Lixie's stories. She would sit on the porch and tell tales of planets covered in ice, of stars that sang, and of tiny girls who defied kings with kindness. The children never noticed her limp or the scar near her eye. They only noticed how her words made them feel seen. One child, a girl with glasses too big for her face, asked, "Were you scared when you came to Earth?" Lixie nodded. "Yes," she said, "but someone made me feel safe." The girl grinned. "Was it Mr. Elias?" Lixie laughed softly. "Yes, it was." That evening, Lixie wrote in her notebook again. She wrote a new poem, short and simple. It read, "A voice found me when I was lost. It didn't yell. It didn't order. It whispered, and that whisper saved me." She handed the poem to Elias. He placed it beside the radio where all the best words were kept. That night, they sat by the fire. The stars above blinked gently, almost like they were listening. Lixie leaned her head against Elias's shoulder. "I used to think home was a palace," she whispered. "But it's not gold or glass. It's a chair beside the fire. It's a voice that says, 'You matter,' even when the world says you don't." Elias nodded, his voice low. "Home," he said, "is where someone stays, even when they don't have to." And there, in a small house on a quiet Earth hill, an exiled princess and a quiet man proved that love doesn't need thrones, just 2 hearts, and a voice brave enough to speak.